Hey everybody, it's Jordan here for the Who You Got podcast. Today we're going to be looking at our model, our computer model for predicting the outcome of college basketball games. Particularly, we're going to be reviewing how well our model did in the first and second rounds of the NCAA tournament. We're going to be looking at how it predicts the Sweet 16, Elite 8, and Final Four, and eventually the championship game. We're going to see who our model predicts to win those games. We're going to be reviewing our model's performance, so that way you can see that there is some empirical evidence backing up the idea that our model is pretty darn good at predicting the outcome of these games, especially given the randomness and the luck involved in any competitive sport. We're also going to be looking at updated Sweet 16 projections that are different from our model because our model obviously didn't get every game right. So some Sweet 16 games are different than what our model projected them to be about a week ago. So we're going to be looking at the games that are going to be taking place on March the 28th and March the 29th, and we're going to see who our model projects to win. But first of all, let's get into how well our model has done so far. So, if you can see here the games in the first round on the far left here, and the games in the second round on the second from the left row, and we have them labeled by region. The first is the East region, then the West, then the Midwest, and then the South. If a team's name is colored in green, that means that our model projected them to win, and they did win. If a team's name is colored in red, it means that our model projected them to lose, but they actually won. So with that in mind, let's do a quick overview of how our model performed. Our model actually performed pretty well in the East region. Um, it projected 6 out of 8 games correctly in the first round. That's 75%. Uh, uh, Getting that means it was correct 75% of the time. The only games it missed in the East region were Liberty beating Mississippi State and Minnesota beating Louisville. But other than that, it projected games pretty well. It predicted some minor upsets. It projected the 9-seeded UCF beating VCU. It projected, um, let's see here, was there any other lower seed it predicted to win? Not in the East region. But we'll get into some other upsets it predicted later. But it is pretty predictive. Moving on to the West region, this was again another good region for it. It predicted 75% of games correctly in the first round, 6 out of 2. Said Gonzaga would win, of course. That's an easy prediction. It did predict it did predict Syracuse, the 8th seed, to beat Baylor, but Baylor actually got the upset and beat the 8th seed to Syracuse and moved on to face Gonzaga in the second round. It also predicted Marquette to beat Murray State. Our model didn't take into consideration the heroics of Ja Morant here. But other than that, it predicted every game correctly. It predicted that 10 seed Florida would beat 7 seed Nevada. So our model is independent of seeding. It doesn't just project that the higher seed wins all the time. And by the way, our model is based off of a team's offensive rating per 100 possessions, plus their opponent's defensive rating per 100 possessions, divided by 2. So we add them together and divide it by 2 to get an average between the two, and then we add or subtract their strength of schedule, and of course their depending and their strength of schedule. We use the numerical value put on that by basketballreference.com. All these stats come from basketballreference.com. It's a wonderful place to get stats from. But that's our model. We're looking at how efficient you are on offense, how efficient you are on defense, or how efficient you allow your opponent to be. And then we add or subtract strength of schedule based on whether or not your strength of schedule had a positive or negative numerical value. Um, and this model actually is pretty darn predictive. The Midwest was where we did the best at. We got 7 out of 8 games correct in this model, which is above 80%, I believe. The only game we missed was we predicted Iowa State to beat Ohio State. And as you can see, the value we ascribed to these teams based on the factors I just informed you about was actually pretty close here. So, an upset was not improbable. We did predict Washington, the 9 seed, to beat the 8 seeded Utah State in the West region. In the South, you see another 6-2 record. Our model tends to lean towards being correct around 75 to 80% of the time. The only games we missed here was we wrongly predicted Wisconsin would beat Oregon by a fairly wide margin, but Oregon got the upset. And of course, an upset that I'm sure that very few people saw coming, UC Irvine beating Kansas State. Um, But other than that, we were pretty darn accurate. We predicted an upset here. Iowa beating Cincinnati. I believe Iowa was a 10 seed beating a 7 seed Cincinnati. So our model was pretty darn good. Going into the second round, we did this prior to the tournament. So if you see some matchups that didn't really happen, such as let's see here, Louisville versus Michigan State. It was in reality it was Minnesota versus Michigan State. That's because we did it beforehand, just like you would a bracket for ESPN's bracket challenge or the NCAA bracket challenge. So that's the way we did this here. We predicted Duke would move on to the Sweet 16. Virginia Tech, we predicted them that we predicted that they would beat Mississippi State, even though they actually played Liberty. We projected Maryland to beat LSU, even though LSU actually came out on top in that one. And we correctly predicted that Michigan State would advance to the Sweet 16 here. We actually got 100% of our West Region games right in the second round, or at least in terms of who we projected to win. Gonzaga, Florida State, Texas Tech, and Michigan all advancing to the Sweet 16. So that means that that bracket is looking pretty darn good for us right now. We did similarly well, or almost as well, in the Midwest. This was our best region in the first round. We got 75% correct. Excuse me. Yeah, it is 75% here, 3 out of 4. The only game we got wrong was we projected Iowa State to beat Houston, which is really hard considering Iowa State lost in the first round. So we were kind of doomed to get that game wrong, anyways. But I guess no excuses here. Again, 75% of our second round games. Um, we got the only game we missed was Wisconsin beating Kansas State. Hard to do because this matchup didn't happen at all. Wisconsin did not make it past the first round, and Kansas State didn't make it past the first round. So there was no chance in hell we were getting that game right, no matter what our model said. But either way, we got every other game correct in the second round. So so overall, what we found out was that in the first round, looking at all of our regions, we predicted 78.13% of games right in the first round. In the second round, we projected 13 out of 16 games correctly, which I'm not actually sure what the percentage is, but we can do that really quick. The percentage of that is 81.25% correct. So our model is correct fairly frequently, somewhere around 4 out of 5 times our model will be correct. Much better than a coin flip. And if you're wondering how it compares to brackets that are done on ESPN's Bracket Challenge, we have amassed a total of 51 points or 510 points, depending on how you ascribe value to first and second round wins. I know ESPN says you get 10 points for predicting a game correctly in the first round, and 20 points for predicting a winner correctly in the second round. And if you go by that, we've gotten 510 points in their bracket challenge, which is a far cry from a perfect score that you could theoretically get through the second round in their tournament, which I think is like 640. But our 510 score in their bracket challenge puts us in the 93 percentile of brackets. We have predicted more accurately the outcome of games than 93% of people who submitted a bracket to ESPN's Bracket Challenge, which I believe is about 12 million people. So that means we've outperformed 11.6 million people um, who've submitted brackets, which is pretty darn impressive. Obviously, our model is not perfect. It will not get every game right, but no model is perfect. But the point is that it's pretty good. Our model has performed the exact same in terms of points that 538's model has, their ELO model. Um, Either way, um, moving on to the Sweet 16 games that would take place on March 28th and March 29th. All of these matchups are real matchups. We have adjusted for the fact that our model was wrong on a few of these predictions. And these will not count towards our actual bracket challenge. We're not going to fiddle with this. You know, what we predicted is what we predicted. We're going to keep it the same, and we'll have a recap at the end of the tournament. But just for the sake of predicting the Sweet 16 games that actually will happen, we've made a new model here. Our model predicts that in the East region, Duke, the number 1 seed, will beat the number 4 seed Virginia Tech Hokies. Virginia Tech has their point guard Justin Robinson back, who was hurt, but Duke is just too much of a powerhouse with Zion Williamson, R.J. Barrett, and the outstanding coaching by Coach K. Buzz Williams is a good coach for Virginia Tech, but Virginia Tech just is unlikely to match up with Duke very well. So we predict Duke will win fairly comfortably. Although the margin here, only a 6.03 margin between Duke and Virginia Tech, is small enough that an upset could occur. Virginia Tech is certainly good enough to have an upset occur. I mean, we've had larger upsets occur. We had Mississippi State favored by over 9 points, and they lost to Liberty. So upsets can occur. Just keep that in mind. But we are projecting that Duke will win this game. When it comes to Louisiana State University versus Michigan State, we predict that Michigan State will advance. Michigan State is a very efficient team on both sides of the ball, much more so than Louisiana State. And also, Michigan State has played a tougher schedule. As you can see, their strength of schedule was much higher, about 3 points higher than Louisiana State University. And our model really likes strength of schedule because it's kind of like you've conditioned yourself to play tough games all year. And ceteris paribus, all else equal, teams that have played tougher teams throughout the year will have an edge on teams that have played easier teams throughout the year, and that's one of the things that holds back Gonzaga in our model. Even though we do predict them to beat Florida State and move on to the Elite Eight, their strength of schedule is actually pretty low relative to a lot of teams that are still in the tournament. 4.38, as you'll see. I think Florida State has a 10.57. Now, you may say, oh, wow, that's a huge discrepancy in strength of schedule, so why is Gonzaga favored? Gonzaga is favored because they are one of, if not the most efficient teams on offense in the NCAA. They also have a pretty good defense. Their offense gets a lot of attention, but their defense is pretty good as well. They allow 95.6 points per 100 possessions, and they score 124 points per 100 possessions. Absolutely unreal. Duke, which has some of the best players in the country, as you can see, they score 112.9 points per 100 possessions. So, Zion and R.J. Barrett are outperformed by Gonzaga's stellar offense, and that can carry you a long way in our model, as well it should. I believe that is pretty predictive. So we have Gonzaga beating Florida State. Looking at the game, Texas Tech versus Michigan, the Wolverines, this is going to be a close one. Our model favors Michigan by a little bit more than 2 points, about 2.12 points. However, we do think Michigan will win this game. They actually have an offense that is very similar to Texas Tech's, but the main difference between, and a defense, by the way, but the main difference between them is that Michigan has played tougher games all year, which means it's harder to get a higher offensive rating. It means they've been conditioned to win close games and against tough opponents. They've had more experience seeing different coaching styles from top tier coaches and playing against top tier players. So our model gives Michigan the edge. It does not mean Texas Tech is a bad team or that they can't pull the upset. Obviously, only a 2 point margin means that upsets are very likely, relative to other potential upsets. But we do favor Michigan to go to the Elite Eight in the West. In the Midwest, we have UNC beating Auburn, perhaps by a lower margin than you might think. Perhaps by a lower margin than you might think. Less than 3 point margin. You're looking at a 2.6 point margin roughly for UNC over Auburn. This is a margin that UNC has not dealt with so far in this tournament. Obviously, they were a 1 seed, so they were favored by 26 points against Iona, and they were favored by 11 points against Washington. Being favored by only 2.6 points is a major change for the Tar Heels. Now, I still think they'll come out on top. They've got a lot of great young players. Their coach, Roy Williams, is legendary. He's got a great offense. The pace the pace with which they play makes upsets less likely than a team like, say, Virginia, which we'll get to in a second. But Auburn could pull the upset out. I mean, if they hit their threes and if they play a slow game and they're able to play their style of game, then they can definitely overcome UNC, especially when Auburn actually has a more efficient offense than UNC. If you look at their offensive ratings, it's just that UNC has a better defense and it has a higher strength of schedule. But if Auburn's offense gets clicking, they can knock out the Tar Heels. But we do think the Tar Heels will win this game. Houston versus Kentucky. This was a close one. I honestly thought our model would predict Houston to win. If you asked me to go off my gut, that's what I would say. But our model predicts Kentucky to win. Kentucky will win this game primarily because it has a better defense. His defensive rating is 5 points lower than Houston's. And in this case, it's kind of like a game of golf. You want your score to be lower on defense because that means you're giving up less points, right, per 100 possessions. So, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. Kentucky has better defense, and they also have a higher strength of schedule, 9.78 versus 4.17. Houston has not played many difficult opponents, just like Gonzaga. So I believe that, so or at least I believe, and our model believes that that will hurt Houston as they play tougher and tougher opponents deeper into the tournament. And we think that their dance will end here with the Kentucky, with the University of Kentucky. Moving on to the final region, and the final region that will have Sweet 16 games played is Virginia, is the South region. Number 1 seed Virginia versus, I believe, 13 seed Oregon. Oregon has had a little bit of a Cinderella story so far, and they really could embarrass the Cavaliers for the second year in a row if they beat them here in the Sweet 16. But I think it's unlikely. Virginia is one of the best teams in the country, and there's really no two ways about it. They have one of the best defenses in the country, allowing 89.6 points per 100 possessions. They also score a lot of points, 116.7 versus 106 for Oregon. They also have a much tougher strength of schedule, about 3.5 points higher. So we believe that Virginia will beat Oregon. We don't think it'll be particularly close. We have an 11-point margin here between the two of them. It again, upsets happen all the time. Teams get hot, teams get lucky, yada yada. One thing about Virginia that makes it particularly prone to upsets, which our model really doesn't factor in, is the pace of their play. Virginia plays at the lowest pace in the NCAA, at least one of the lowest. And what that does is it gives you and your opponent less possessions. So that means it amplifies the effect of when the other team gets lucky or gets a hot hand, right? If the other team makes 3-4 threes in a row, that may not mean a lot if you play and have 80 possessions a game, but if you take 15 possessions away from the game, like Virginia likes to do, and only have 16 or 65 possessions a game, then all of a sudden that 4 possession streak of making threes matters a lot more relative to everything else. So Virginia does put itself at risk of upsets, but one of the perks of their fast-paced play is that their offense is a lot more efficient and their defense is better, which you see in the stats. So our model actually might be a little too friendly to Virginia. It actually projects them to win the whole tournament this year, but that's not without reason. Virginia is a very, very good team, and we have them beating Duke by 0.2 points in the national championship game in April. Moving on to the final game we're going to look at today, we have the Purdue Boilermakers versus the Tennessee Volunteers. We have Tennessee favored by the smallest margin that we're going to favor anybody, I believe, in the Sweet 16. They are favored by less than a point. They're favored by about 0.7 points, 0.69 points. And the primary difference between Tennessee and Purdue is the fact that Tennessee has a much better offense and a much better defense than Purdue. Not much better, but marginally better, and that allows them to overcome their slight deficit in strength of schedule. Tennessee has a higher offensive rating per 100 possessions by about 3 points, and a better defensive rating by about 2 points. So we think that Tennessee will edge out a victory against the Boilermakers here, and maybe make a run for Virginia if they beat Oregon. Obviously, it would be very good for Tennessee if Oregon upset Virginia and Tennessee got an easy Elite Eight matchup, or at least you would think it would be easy. UMBC won in the Elite Eight last year, I believe. But we do predict Tennessee to come out on top. Very, very marginally, very small margin of victory for Tennessee and the Volunteers. But we do stand by Tennessee in our projections. Anyways, guys, I'd like to thank you for watching our video. I would like for you to comment below telling us, who do you got? Who's going to win the NCAA tournament? How is your bracket doing? What do you think of our model? Do you think it's bunk? Do you think it's something real? Do you like the way our model is set up with offensive rating, defensive rating, and strength of schedule? Do you prefer another model? Do you prefer to go off your gut? Please leave a comment below and let us know. And also, please subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell to get notifications when we post a new video. Please subscribe to us on Twitter and go like us on Facebook. We want to have a very interactive community. We want you to tell us who you've got in the NCAA tournament, who's going to win the Sweet 16 games on Thursday and Friday. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for watching our video, and I'd like to wish you a very good day, and I hope you enjoy all the March Madness.